Path of Exile 2 early access has been live for just over a week, just like it says here, and they have been releasing a ton of patch notes. We're seeing buffs, we're seeing nerfs, we're seeing changes. It's great to see all of this feedback is getting listened to by the developers and addressed in the game. Basically, everything in here is a good thing for the game. This patch looks great. If you disagree, leave a comment below explaining why, but let's get right into it. First off, gameplay features. They did mention last week that they'll be adding the capacity to fast travel between checkpoints within an area. I have been waiting for this because sometimes you hit a checkpoint, but then you hit another checkpoint that's further away from the actual objective that you wanted, or you need to come back to that checkpoint after you go do something, and it's kind of a pain. This is going to make that a lot better. I like this change. They're also making passive point respeccing cheaper, even at higher levels, approximately 40 to 50% less gold cost for respeccing. This is fine. This is helpful a lot for campaign when you still probably don't have a ton of gold because you're just selling the random gear you get from playing the campaign. But once you're in maps, gold drops in troves, and this wasn't as big of an issue, but it's still good change overall. Probably the third best change in the patch notes. Trial of the Sekimas. This is Sanctum from PoE 1, and players were having trouble because of how much honor damage they were taking. This is particularly because Path of Exile 2 Early Access has tried to make melee something that is playable, something that people actually want to play, but that naturally means you're probably going to take more hits than when you're playing at range. For something where you have a limited amount of honor and it's hard to replenish, that kind of sucks and it feels bad playing melee. So the damage that you take now scales based on the damage to enemies. So if you're closer to enemies, you're going to take less honor damage. That's really cool. Also fixed a bug where damage over time was dealing thrice as much damage to honor as intended. That's crazy. I'm glad that that is getting put in its place because that would really suck. Also, the rest of these changes just look good. Gitter golems no longer use basic attacks. Serpent Clan's burrow and ambush attack has visual telegraphing. Volcanoes now last half the duration. These are all just good changes. Makes it easier to get through the trial of the Sekimas. Endgame and monster balance. This section is awesome. First, right off the bat here, maps no longer have additional elemental resistance penalties inherently applied at T6 and T11 or higher maps. It's now consistent across all of the endgame. While you're playing Path of Exile 2 Early Access, you may have noticed that throughout the campaign, your resistances drop. You get penalized for being further in the game. This is something that also happens in Path of Exile 1 during the campaign. Something that a lot of players probably didn't know is that when you enter T6 maps, your resistances drop 10%. When you're entering T11 maps, they drop another 10%. So you're taking a 20% resistance penalty by entering maps. And if you're not aware of this, this means you're probably taking more damage, dying a lot more, and you may not have expected it. You may not understand why. This was why it was happening. It seems like this is being removed. That is awesome. Probably the best change in all of the patch notes. This is going to feel really good. Chaos damage now scales less aggressively. Critical strikes now deal less bonus damage. You're taking less damage from things that felt really bad. That's great. Lowered the baseline monster density in breach encounters. Lowered the frequency of elite monsters appearing. This might suck if you are a breach player, a breach enjoyer, but is probably a fine change. I haven't done a ton of breach, but it's probably fine. Disabled volatile crystals modifier and purple explosives creating by the volatile plant modifier on rare monsters now deals significantly less damage. Probably the second best change in all the patch notes. It did a ton of damage. It was hard to dodge, particularly if you're getting CC'd by enemies. Dealing less damage and not being available for this modifier is just good. Siphon Flask charges modifier now drains 10 times less charges. There should be fewer charges per second. This was unintentionally draining too many charges. So this was a bug fix, not a buff. Makes sense that with a bug fix, they've got a grammatical error. That's pretty funny. This is going to make Endgame a lot more tolerable, a lot more survivable, as they point out here. I don't mind that at all. Character and item balance. Charm modifiers on belts substantially more common now appear at much lower levels. This is great. I have been rocking a belt with one charm modifier, so I've been rocking one charm for the entire campaign. A lot of my friends, one charm the entire campaign. It would be nice to be able to use more charms. Happy about that. Electrocute harder to build up. I guess this was maybe overtuned or something. New lightning damage and electrocute cluster in the passive tree. That's cool. More ability to pump up your damage. Now more difficult to chain freeze enemies by reducing the amount of freeze buildup applied after a freeze has been applied. It's probably a very good and positive change. In the past, there were issues with chain stunning bosses to where a boss could basically not act at all. And I guess the same was true with freezes. In general, this is probably good. It'll make fights a little bit harder, but I don't think it completely will diminish the value of freezing or stunning enemies. You just won't be able to keep it permanently. Hunter's Talisman notable now grants +1 charm slot. Again, having charm slots, really nice. These are basically utility flasks with instilling orbs applied to them from Path of Exile 1. They're probably in the game to help reduce the button fatigue if you're playing WASD, because otherwise you have a lot of buttons to worry about just with flasks. Moving on, skill and support gem balance. All right, we know that there have been some overtuned builds that have gotten nerfed, some of them nerfed into the ground. We also know that there are underpowered skills in the game that need some love, and it looks like GGG is aware of that as well. There are some skills getting buffed. There are also a few that will probably get nerfed. As GGG has noted before, they're going to keep adding support gems. Here are a couple new support gems. Happy to see this. Happy to see the active development and the release of these support gems. Tremor support gem, multiple aftershocks to skills. Damage penalty, but overall this is going to be a benefit. You're going to hit multiple times. So things that scale with hits are going to be applied multiple times. So overall, you're probably getting a damage buff by using the support gem. That's kind of the whole point. So that's kind of cool. Fitting support gem can give more damage to command skills of supported minions. Pretty cool. A lot of minion related affixes in the game, supports in the game, stuff like that. Exposure support gems no longer have a penalty on damage of supported skills, but now have a mana cost multiplier of 120%. I think that's a fair trade-off. Don't nerf my damage, especially when exposure makes them take more damage. It kind of makes it hard to understand what the outcome of all of that is. So this is just going to be more clarity to the player of what's going on. A couple nerfs to the remaining overachieving skills. This is a good thing. We like this overall. If you are playing a build that is using these skills, I'm sorry. That sucks for you. It really does. But ultimately, you want time and investment in a build to be rewarded with power, not just choosing something that is strong by default. A lot of these nerfs are because the skills involved were very easy to put together. It was like one gem and one support or something like that, and you were able to defeat all of the content throughout the campaign and probably endgame as well. These changes are positive, even though they might affect you right now. And come on, boys. We are not in league yet. This is early access. None of this really matters that much. We don't mind. These are standard characters. You're not going to play these ever again after they launch leagues. So it's all right. Reroll a new character, try a different ascendancy. It'll be okay. This is probably the last patch we're going to see before the holidays. So yeah, let's keep grinding. Gear games. All right. See ya, boys.